So something else you worked on was post Bayesianism, where you're trying to take account of complexity.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I'm steering away from that term. You know.
you don't like that anymore?
I
What do you call it now?
I mean, between Bayes and frequentist, I certainly am a Bayesian. There's
Right.
no question about that. So that's why I don't want to. When I write post Bayes, it looks like I'm opposing
Oh,
Bayes, so I don't want
yeah.
to use that. But what I had in mind there is that all schools of probability, both Bayesian and frequentist, ignore one fundamental fact, and that is the limited capacity of the human mind.
Right. And
And
you have that paper, and then I think a grad student did her master's thesis on it as well. But do you know of any work beyond that on it?
well, I mean, I can give you some basic references for people who stress the fact that the human mind is limited. Herb Simon, I think, is the major protagonist of that
Sure.
particular thought. He's dead now, but that's what is one of his major foci is precisely that point. He kept saying your models are too are very imperfect in the sense that you are implying that people have infinite capacities for planning, for calculating probabilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and so he kept saying that that's completely untrue as far as the actual human beings are concerned. And so it's a critique. And how did economists respond to that? They didn't. Well, I mean, all that proves is that he's absolutely correct. Economists do not have the mental capacity to actually do more than they are doing.
Well, I guess one question um, is the focus of your post Bayesian stuff doing a better job modeling how people think? Because my impression was actually you were trying to think of a better way of doing inference. So you're trying to
Well,
come up
I
with
mean,
better models.
I think I
Actually,
have definitely improved on that. The way people actually think. Um, I mean, there's a lot of psychological evidence about that. You know about Kahneman and Tversky.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they represented in very dramatic form how limited and how I want to say the word irrational, but obviously that's not quite the right word to use here. You know what they do. For one thing, if the human mind is uh, limited in such, it must violate the principles of probability because you cannot begin thinking about something without making working hypotheses about it, assumptions. That means you're in effect you're assigning probability one to a whole bunch of different things. But then uh, you go off to something else, and you might change that probability to something else. Well, if you assign probability one to something, it's going to be one forever according to the principles of probability.
Right.
So, which means that the human mind actually does not work by. I mean, even the good human mind does not work by the rules of probability. There's something else that's involved there.
Well,
So,
do you have in mind some coherent logic that lets you assign probability one out of necessity to keep complexity down, but then abandon that certainty when needed? Do you have
well,
some
I mean,
idea on how to
one
make
thing
that
you
work?
can do is to introduce a term, the level of complexity. And in fact, there is something called complexity theory, also by Kolmogorov, by the way,
Hmm.
and that represents uh, the the shortest way of describing something, this, like the the the, the minimal um, um, what am I talking about? Uh, the minimal algorithm for doing something. That's the measure of complexity. And yeah, but you can add complexity. You could say, okay, I'm trying to do things, but I want to operate in such a way as to stay within. There's a certain bound. I can't go beyond this particular level because my mind is too small to accompany it. So what you could do is say, optimize under that constraint. Now, if you think about that rigorously, it becomes even more complicated because now you have to worry about constraints. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, it's obvious that a lot of the things we do involves simplifying things as much as possible. For example, definitions. What is a definition? It's having one word that represents a fairly complex entity, if you wanted to spell it out, maybe even infinitely complex, all represented by one single word. So that's where the concept of definition comes in, and all sorts of things. You know, if a word is used frequently, you typically begin abbreviating that word,
sure,
et cetera, et cetera.
Well, you're talking about human limitations. A lot of science is done now using computers, and Bayesian modeling, especially, I think, heavily uses computers, along with, of course, deep learning,
right,
and that sort of thing. Um, do you think post-Bayesian post-Bayesianism matters as much?
Oh, well, I mean,
now
that's
that
very
people
important.
are
I mean, it's extending the
offloading
human
their
mind without,
thinking, sort of.
you know, exceeding the capacity. But when you think about it, just about every tool does that. You have a tool, you know, you have a hammer, you can exert much more pressure with the hammer than without the hammer. Mm-hmm. So you're extending the capacity of the human entity, human body, to do something. And uh, you know, what do scientific instruments do? What does a telescope do? What does a microscope do? Well, basically, what it's doing is it's taking something that you could not observe with your ordinary senses that are you know, without that, you're bringing it within a range of the things. So that, for example, there might be colors, you know, beyond the ultraviolet or below the infrared. What you do then is take a map and color it in colors that you can actually perceive, and so forth. I mean, what it's doing is you've got you know, in terms of photography, you've got time-lapse photography, where you could actually see the way a plant is growing, or you could see the way the hour hand on a watch is actually moving, which you can't see ordinarily. And on the other hand, so that what that is doing is speeding up time, so that, you know, the plant, which you can't see growing ordinarily, is speeded up so you can actually see it moving, and vice versa. There are ways of photographing a bullet in orbit, you know, as it's been fired.
Right.
Let's say piercing an apple.
Right.
You've often seen that. So that's slowing it down. So in both cases, you're speeding it up, you're slowing it down to the point where the ordinary human eye can see what's going on, and use special colors. A telescope, of course, brings very far objects which you can't see close to you, and a microscope brings very small objects, which you also can't see, to a normal level of vision, etc. So that comprises a large fraction of inventions. You have communication inventions. You know, you can't talk beyond the range of ordinary shouting, but you have a communication thing. You can talk to somebody on the other side of the world.
Oh, we do. Yep.
Yeah.